Have you ever seen a child's smile return after years of silence, as if the whole world had been waiting for that single moment? In the quiet streets of a snow-covered town, a father, a loyal German shepherd, and a little girl stand against shadows that once ruled their home. What they discover will test love, courage, and the strength to begin again. Before we dive into this powerful story, tell me, where are you watching from today? Leave a comment below so we can see how far our family of listeners reaches. And if you believe in the healing power of love and second chances, make sure to subscribe so you won't miss the next story. May your day be filled with light, warmth, and blessings. The small city of Willow Creek lay beneath the embrace of late autumn winds. The air carried the sharp edge of the coming winter, and dry leaves tumbled across quiet sidewalks like restless dancers in faded costumes. Street lamps flickered along the empty roads, casting cones of light on damp pavement, still glistening from an afternoon drizzle. The Hayes residence stood at the end of Sycamore Lane, a wide colonial-style house with white shutters and ivy creeping up its brick walls. On the surface, it seemed like the home of a proud and successful officer. Yet beneath its roof, silence had grown thick like dust gathering in abandoned corners. Into this silence, a cruiser rolled quietly, its headlights sweeping across the iron gate before settling into the long driveway. Officer Daniel Hayes stepped out of the vehicle, his heavy boots striking the gravel with the steady rhythm of a man used to long nights on patrol. At 42, Daniel carried himself with a presence that spoke of both authority and weariness. He was tall, with broad shoulders that filled the doorway of any room he entered, and his dark brown hair, once full and vibrant, now bore streaks of gray that reflected years of service in uniform. His face was weathered, square-jawed, with lines etched deep around his storm-gray eyes, lines carved not only by age but by countless nights chasing shadows and facing danger head-on. Yet tonight, as he carried a small duffel bag over one shoulder and a stuffed bear tucked under his arm, there was no trace of the hardened officer in his demeanor. Instead, he looked like a father returning home, his steps quickening with a boyish anticipation, his mind rehearsing the smile of his daughter, the weight of her small arms thrown around his neck. Trotting loyally by his side was Rex, his black and silver German shepherd. At 7 years old, Rex was in the prime of his working life, his thick coat shining under the dim porch light, the dark saddle markings on his back contrasting with his silver-gray legs and chest. His amber eyes were alert, scanning the shadows instinctively as a trained canine partner would. Yet, when he glanced up at Daniel, those same eyes softened, brimming with devotion. Rex had been by Daniel's side for years, through drug busts, midnight chases, and tense confrontations. He bore a faint scar across his left flank, the remnant of a knife wound sustained while protecting his handler during a warehouse raid. But that scar was a badge of his courage. Around strangers, Rex was vigilant and disciplined, but around Lily, Daniel's daughter, he transformed into a gentle guardian, patient and endlessly protective. To her, he was not just a police dog, he was her silent friend. Daniel paused on the porch, adjusting the duffel bag, his fingers brushing against the soft fur of the bear he carried. The toy was small, bright yellow, with stitched eyes and a lopsided grin, something he had picked up at an airport gift shop in Chicago. It wasn't grand, but he imagined Lily's face lighting up when she saw it. That thought softened him in a way little else could, for Daniel was not only a police officer, he was also a widower, still carrying the weight of promises left behind by his late wife, Claire. Claire Hayes had been the kind of woman who left an impression wherever she went. Tall and slender, with auburn hair that fell in waves to her shoulders and green eyes that sparkled with quiet humor. She had been a school teacher loved by her students for her patience and kindness. To neighbors, she was the epitome of warmth, someone who remembered birthdays, baked pies for block parties, and offered comfort to anyone in need. Yet behind her, Grace was also resilience, a strength forged when life struck her cruelly. 3 years earlier, leukemia had consumed her in a battle that left Daniel holding her fragile hand at a hospital bedside, watching the light fade from her eyes. Before she passed, Claire had whispered a plea. "Promise me, Daniel. Love Lily, protect her. She is special. She deserves to live like a princess." Those words had become Daniel's anchor, and though he tried to honor them, The whirlwind of his career and the loneliness of grief had pushed him into choices he now questioned. One of those choices had been Vanessa Monroe. Hayes, his second wife, was 10 years younger, a woman of striking beauty with long blonde hair and pale blue eyes that gleamed under the chandeliers of social gatherings. In public, she was poised, graceful, and attentive, an image of a supportive wife who charmed neighbors and dazzled Daniel's colleagues at police banquets. Yet behind closed doors, her nature shifted. She had a sharp tongue, a quick temper, and a hunger for attention that was never fully satisfied. To Daniel, grieving and exhausted, she had seemed like a lifeline, someone who could help raise Lily and fill the aching void Claire's absence left behind. But over the past year, Daniel had sensed cracks in that picture-perfect facade, though his long assignments often kept him away long enough for doubts to blur. Tonight, those doubts would crystallize into something undeniable. Daniel turned the key in the lock and pushed the heavy oak door open. At once, a wave of stale alcohol and cigarette smoke rolled into his face, thick enough to make him pause. His brow furrowed. The house was silent, too silent. He had imagined laughter, the shuffle of small footsteps, perhaps even Rex's excited bark echoed by his daughter's voice. Instead, shards of broken glass glinted on the hallway floor. His boots crunched against them as he moved forward, Rex stiffening at his side, ears perked. "Lily?" Daniel's deep voice called into the void. Only silence answered. He quickened his pace, heart pounding, past the dining room where empty bottles rolled on the carpet, chairs overturned as if the aftermath of some careless gathering. His chest tightened as dread took hold. Then he turned into the living room, and his world collapsed. On the floor near the coffee table, Lily sat hunched, her small frame draped in a white dress now stained with grease and dirt. Her auburn hair, tangled and unkempt, clung to her flushed cheeks. At just 8 years old, Lily bore the distinctive features of Down syndrome. Her almond-shaped eyes glistened with innocence, her cheeks were round, and her speech was slower than most children's. But what defined her most was the warmth she carried. Despite her disability, she had always been gentle, eager to hug, quick to smile, and endlessly fascinated by small joys. A butterfly in the garden, Rex's wagging tail, or the sound of rain tapping on the window. But tonight her smile was different, warped by hunger. Her tiny hands scooped scraps of cold chicken and bread from the carpet, shoving them quickly into her mouth. Between hurried bites, she mumbled words that pierced Daniel's heart like a blade. "Eat quickly before the food runs away." Daniel froze, the sight burning into his eyes. His knees buckled, and the stuffed bear slipped from his arm, landing softly on the rug. He rushed forward, dropping to the floor, pulling his daughter into his trembling arms. The grease smeared onto his shirt, but he didn't care. "Lily, my little girl," his voice cracked, choked with grief. Lily looked up at him, her face smeared, her lips greasy, but her eyes, those bright, innocent eyes, lit up. She held up a piece of half-eaten chicken toward him, with a foolish little grin. "Daddy, eat with me." Tears blurred Daniel's vision. The man who had stared down criminals without flinching now wept openly, crushed under the weight of guilt. Rex pressed close, licking Lily's hand softly, his amber eyes clouded with worry. And then Daniel's gaze shifted. On the sofa lay Vanessa. Her red dress was rumpled, her makeup smeared, her blonde hair tangled across her face. A half-empty bottle of liquor dangled from one hand as she muttered in a slurred voice, unaware of the scene before her. "Useless cripple. All you do is waste food. You should just disappear." The words fell like acid in the room. Daniel's chest ignited with rage. His voice thundered, shattering the silence. "Shut your mouth. Get up right now and apologize to the child." Vanessa stirred, fluttering her lashes open, her pale eyes hazy with intoxication. She let out a mocking laugh, dripping with disdain. "Apologize? To her? What do you even know about this house when you're never here?" She sank back, smirking as though nothing had happened, but Daniel's grip tightened around Lily. His storm-gray eyes burned as he held his daughter against his chest, Rex bristling beside him. For the first time in years, Daniel realized the enemy was not out there on the streets of Willow Creek. The enemy was inside his home. The night after Daniel found Lily crouched on the living room floor passed in heavy silence. The autumn wind howled outside Willow Creek, rattling branches against the windows as if nature itself shared his unrest. Daniel carried his daughter to her bedroom, a small pastel-painted space tucked away at the end of the hallway. The wallpaper, once chosen by Claire with cheerful daisies and soft yellows, now looked faded, but it still whispered of the woman who had loved every inch of this home before disease claimed her. Lily curled beneath her blanket, still clutching the greasy stuffed bear Daniel had given her. Rex settled on the rug beside the bed, his black and silver fur rising and falling with each steady breath, his eyes half open, watchful even in rest. Daniel remained seated at the edge of the bed, leaning forward with his head in his hands. He could not erase the sound of Lily's words. Eat quickly before the food runs away. They looped endlessly in his mind, stabbing deeper each time. When he lifted his gaze, he saw her small face turned sideways on the pillow, lips parted slightly in sleep. She had never looked so fragile. Her round cheeks were still smeared faintly with grease, and strands of auburn hair stuck to her forehead. He leaned close, whispering to the dark, "I'm sorry, baby girl. I failed you." His voice cracked, and the tears he thought he had exhausted on the job returned, hot and silent. He remembered the last time he wept so uncontrollably, in a hospital room 3 years ago, when Claire's hand slipped from his, and her final whisper clung to him like a curse. "Promise me, Daniel, love Lily. She is special. She deserves to live like a princess." Claire Hayes had always been the anchor of their lives. Even when chemotherapy had hollowed her cheeks and dimmed her once lively green eyes, she had managed to smile for Lily, brushing the child's hair with slow hands, humming lullabies through cracked lips. Her illness had shaped her final months, but it had never dimmed her character. She remained gentle, patient, and determined to fill Lily's world with love. That memory haunted Daniel now more than any gruesome crime scene he had witnessed in his 20 years as a cop. As the clock ticked toward dawn, Daniel stayed by his daughter's side. When the first gray light crept into the room, Vanessa appeared in the doorway. Her transformation was startling. Gone was the drunken, slurring figure from last night. Instead, she was immaculate, her long blonde hair brushed sleek, her pale blue eyes accentuated with subtle makeup, a silk blouse tucked into fitted trousers that gave her the appearance of control. She carried herself with poise, her shoulders squared, a faint smile fixed on her lips as though she were a model wife in a magazine advertisement. She set a tray down in the dining room with practiced grace, coffee steaming, plates of fruit and bacon arranged neatly. To a casual eye, she looked every bit the dutiful spouse. Daniel, however, carried the memory of the night before like a blade pressed against his chest. When he brought Lily down for breakfast, his suspicion sharpened into certainty. On the long oak table sat plenty, juicy orange slices, fresh eggs, buttered toast. But in front of Lily's chair was a single stale piece of bread set aside on a small chipped plate. Lily did not protest. She folded her hands on her lap and bowed her head as if waiting. Daniel frowned and placed a slice of fruit in front of her. She shook her head quickly, whispering, "Mom said I have to wait for leftovers." The words struck him again, harder than a punch. He forced his voice to remain calm. "Sweetheart, you don't have to wait. You can eat now." Lily looked sideways, her wide, almond-shaped eyes darting to Vanessa before back to him. Vanessa responded smoothly, her tone sweet as syrup. "Oh, Daniel, you must have misheard. She simply likes simple food. I take care of her every day in every little way." She lifted her cup of coffee, sipping gracefully, her lips curving into a smile that almost dared him to challenge her. Daniel said nothing, his storm gray eyes fixed on his daughter's trembling hands. He placed another egg on her plate. She stared at it, then murmured to herself softly, "My tummy is making music again. I have to feed it." The words broke him from the inside. He clenched the fork in his hand so tightly that his knuckles whitened, but he did not raise his voice. Not yet. From the kitchen came another presence, Rosa Alvarez, the housekeeper who had served the Hayes family for more than 2 decades. Rosa was in her early 60s, her back slightly bent from years of labor, her hands calloused but still steady. Her silver hair was pulled into a neat bun, and she wore her simple uniform of a dark skirt and plain blouse. She had once been Claire's ally in running the household, ensuring every corner was cared for and every meal nourishing. To Lily, Rosa was like a grandmother figure, kind, patient, with a faint Spanish accent coloring her words. She entered with a pitcher of water, her dark eyes full of quiet worry. "Good morning, little princess," she said softly to Lily, who lifted her gaze and gave a fleeting smile before shrinking back again under Vanessa's cold glance. Daniel caught the moment. He saw the silent communication in Rosa's eyes, the restrained urgency. She knew. She had seen far more than she could ever say aloud. After breakfast, Daniel excused himself, claiming he needed to check in with the precinct. He stepped outside to the porch, the chill air bracing against his skin. Rex followed, pressing close against his leg, sensing his turmoil. Daniel knelt, burying his face into Rex's thick fur, and whispered, "She's suffering when I'm gone, boy. I should have seen it sooner." Rex let out a low whine, his tail sweeping once across the porch boards, a reassurance as if to say he understood and was ready to stand guard. Later that day, Daniel drove to a nearby park with Lily and Rex, hoping the fresh air might lift her spirit. The park, bordered by willow trees and a small pond, was almost empty. Lily held Rex's leash lightly, her small steps shuffling across the path. Though her dress was plain and her shoes slightly scuffed, her face lit up when Rex tugged gently, chasing after a falling leaf. For a brief moment, Daniel saw the girl she could be, laughing freely, unburdened. He smiled, though his heart ached knowing it was only a borrowed moment. As they returned home, the late afternoon sky painted the streets in muted orange. Daniel felt unease creep into his bones. He entered the house and noticed the atmosphere already shifting. Vanessa was on the phone, her voice low, her laughter like glass clinking, and her eyes flicked toward him briefly before narrowing. He knew then that the woman he had married was more dangerous than he had ever allowed himself to admit. That night, Daniel tucked Lily into bed again. She clutched the yellow bear tightly, Rex lying curled at her feet, the steady thump of his tail on the mattress soothing her. Daniel lingered at the doorway, his hand pressed to the frame, watching the two beings he loved most in the world. His mind whispered the same promise over and over. Never again will I let her be hurt. In the living room below, Vanessa poured herself another glass of wine, her pale eyes narrowing as she gazed at the reflection of herself in the window. Her lips curved into a faint smile, one that never reached her eyes. The days that followed were heavy with tension, though Vanessa wore her mask flawlessly. To neighbors on Sycamore Lane, she smiled and waved, her blonde hair shining under the sunlight, her silk dresses catching the wind with elegance. At church on Sunday morning, she stood near Daniel, whispering greetings to fellow parishioners, her voice soft and sweet. No one suspected the darkness hidden inside the Hayes home, but Daniel no longer saw her through the same lens. He carried in his chest the sound of Lily's whispers about waiting for leftovers, and every glance from Vanessa reminded him of her cruelty. Rex, ever perceptive, became restless whenever Vanessa approached Lily. His hackles would rise, his amber eyes narrowing, and his body would shift subtly to block Lily's small frame. Vanessa would scold him lightly. "Control your mutt, Daniel." But the officer recognized his partner's instincts. Dogs knew what men sometimes ignored. One evening, Daniel invited Ethan Clark into his study. Ethan, once his partner on the force, had retired early after an injury to his knee during a raid left him walking with a permanent limp. At 45, Ethan carried himself with a deliberate steadiness, his broad frame filling the doorway, his salt and pepper hair cropped short. He had the look of a man who had once wrestled chaos daily, but now wore patience like armor. His eyes, a deep brown, held both humor and sorrow. He had seen too much in uniform, but never let bitterness take root. Now he worked as a private investigator, using his experience to uncover what the law often overlooked. "Dan," Ethan said, lowering himself into the leather chair across from the desk, "I can tell something's gnawing at you." Daniel poured 2 glasses of water, his hands trembling slightly. "It's Lily. She's not safe when I'm gone. Vanessa..." He trailed off, unable to finish, the words choking him. Rex, lying at his feet, lifted his head, ears pricked as if listening intently. Ethan leaned forward, his limp slowing but not diminishing his authority. "If you've got suspicions, don't just sit on them. You need proof. You know how the world works. Without evidence, people will call it bitterness or paranoia." Daniel nodded. He had thought the same, which was why he had called Ethan. The two men spread out papers and sketches on the desk, plans for hidden cameras, small devices that could be tucked above door frames or disguised in smoke detectors. Ethan opened his worn leather satchel, revealing the compact black devices he often used for cases of fraud or infidelity. "These little eyes don't lie," he said, his voice low. Over the following days, the cameras were installed quietly. One in the kitchen, tucked behind a cabinet molding. One in the living room, hidden within a decorative clock. Another in the hallway near Lily's bedroom. Daniel placed one more in the dining room chandelier, its view angled down as the long oak table where Lily so often sat with empty plates. Each camera fed into a small monitor in Daniel's study. Late at night, when Lily slept and Rex curled at the foot of her bed, Daniel sat in the study watching the grainy footage. His gray eyes burned as he forced himself to witness what happened when he was not present. It didn't take long. On a Thursday evening, Daniel returned home early from a shift, claiming exhaustion. Vanessa greeted him with her practiced smile, suggesting he rest upstairs. He pretended to comply, but instead settled into the study, monitor flickering. Through the hidden camera in the living room, he saw it all. Vanessa, dressed in a fitted black dress, laughed with Carl Monroe, her younger brother. Carl was 28, tall but wiry, his once boyish charm now corrupted by years of laziness and dependence. His brown hair was slicked back with too much gel, his thin face perpetually twisted into a smirk that never reached his eyes. Those eyes, a murky hazel, carried calculation and contempt. He had never held a steady job, preferring to lean on Vanessa's hospitality, drinking her liquor, smoking in her parlor, and mocking those around him. That night, Carl lounged on the sofa, a glass of whiskey in his hand, while Vanessa entertained guests. Among them was Madison Clark, Vanessa's closest friend. Madison, in her early 30s, worked as an event planner, but had a reputation for chasing indulgence more than business. With her bright red dress, platinum blonde curls, and dark lipstick, she looked glamorous at first glance. Yet her laugh was sharp, mocking, and unkind. She had grown up wealthy, spoiled by parents who solved her mistakes with money, and she carried into adulthood a sense of superiority that often spilled into cruelty. As the three of them sipped wine, music played from a speaker, and the sound of glass clinking filled the air. Then Lily appeared at the top of the staircase. She wore a simple cotton nightgown, her auburn hair tangled from sleep. She clutched her yellow bear tightly, her almond-shaped eyes wide as she hesitated on the step. Rex, trapped upstairs by a closed gate, whined lowly, his body pressed against the barrier. Madison turned first, spotting the child. Her lips curled into a sneer. "Oh, look who it is, the broken doll." Her voice carried across the room like poison. Laughter erupted, Carl slapping his knee, Vanessa giggling into her glass. Daniel sat frozen in his study, watching the screen, his fist clenching so tightly that his knuckles blanched. Lily shrank, hugging her bear closer. Her small feet retreated a step, then she turned and bolted down the hallway. Daniel's chest seized as he watched her disappear from the frame. He rose from his chair, ready to storm into the living room, but Ethan's words echoed in his mind. "Don't act rashly. Let the evidence speak." With a deep breath, he forced himself to sit again. Moments later, the camera in the hallway caught Lily curling against the wall, her knees tucked to her chest. Her lips moved faintly, whispering to the bear, "Mom said eating last makes me good." Tears streamed down Daniel's face as he whispered to the empty room, "She's not your mother." Then another figure appeared, Rosa Alvarez. She moved carefully down the hallway, her back slightly bent, carrying a small glass of water. Her dark skirt brushed the floor as she knelt before Lily, offering the glass with trembling hands. "Drink, querida. It will help." Her Spanish accent softened her words, her wrinkled face filled with kindness. But before Lily could accept it, Carl's voice pierced the hall. "Mind your own business, old woman." He swaggered toward them, his thin frame looming. The glass trembled in Rosa's hand, nearly spilling. Lily flinched, clutching her bear tighter, eyes wide with fear. Rex's furious barks thundered from upstairs, claws scraping at the gate. Carl glanced upward with a sneer, muttering, "Shut that mud up before I do." Daniel gripped the edge of the desk, veins bulging in his temples. He could barely restrain himself, his body screaming to intervene, but he forced himself to remain hidden, to let the silent watchers record every cruelty. He knew now that what festered under his roof was not just neglect, but venom. Venom he would expose. That night, when the house finally quieted, Daniel entered Lily's room. She was asleep, her small hands still clutching the bear, Rex curled protectively at her side. Daniel sat on the edge of the bed, brushing her tangled hair gently. His gray eyes shimmering with guilt and resolve, he whispered, "I see it all now. I promise you, Lily, I'll end this." Downstairs, the cameras continued to blink silently in the darkness, each red light a watchful eye capturing the hidden face of cruelty. The house at Willow Creek seemed peaceful from the outside, but within its walls the air was heavy with unspoken words. After the night of the cruel party, Daniel's mind carried images he could not shake, his daughter clutching her stuffed bear while strangers laughed, Rosa trembling under Carl's sneer, Rex howling behind the gate, desperate to protect. These scenes replayed as Daniel lay in bed, staring at the ceiling while Vanessa slept beside him, her pale face serene, her breath steady as if she carried no burden. To Daniel, her beauty had become a mask of deceit, and every quiet exhale she released sounded like betrayal. Morning brought only more tension. Vanessa, in a satin robe, poured herself coffee and hummed lightly as if the house were a haven of love. Lily sat at the end of the table in silence, poking at a plate of cold toast. Rex lay close by, his chin resting on his paws, his eyes flicking up each time Vanessa moved. Daniel forced a smile for his daughter, placing fruit on her plate, but his heart tightened when she hesitated, glancing nervously at her stepmother before nibbling slowly. Rosa hovered in the background, her aged hands busy polishing silverware, though her eyes kept darting toward Lily. That evening, after the house settled into its uneasy routine, Daniel returned to the study. He watched the monitors, the faint glow of the screens casting deep shadows on his face. Hours of footage showed Vanessa's polished charm, unraveling whenever she believed herself unwatched, snapping at Rosa, mocking Lily under her breath, or pouring liquor until her words slurred. Yet Daniel still waited. Ethan's advice echoed in his ear, "Let them reveal themselves fully." Later that night, Daniel rose quietly and walked the hallway. The floorboards creaked beneath his boots, the walls holding the chill of late autumn. He reached Lily's door and opened it slowly. The nightlight glowed softly, painting her face in warm tones. She was awake, knees pulled to her chest, whispering to the yellow bear. Daniel leaned closer, straining to hear, and his heart broke as her small voice carried through the stillness. "Mom said eating last makes me good. If I eat last, I'm not bad." "Lily," Daniel whispered, kneeling by the bed. She startled, then blinked up at him with those wide, almond-shaped eyes, shining with tears. "Daddy?" she murmured. He gathered her into his arms, pressing his cheek against her tangled hair. Rex lifted his head from the rug and moved closer, resting his warm muzzle against Lily's knee, as though to lend her strength. Daniel swallowed the knot in his throat. "You're not bad, sweetheart. You never have been. You don't need to eat last. You deserve to eat first, to smile first, to be loved first." His voice cracked, but he forced the words out. Lily trembled in his arms before her small hand crept around his neck, clutching him as if anchoring herself to safety. At that moment, Rosa appeared in the doorway. She wore a plain nightgown, her silver hair loose over her shoulders, her wrinkled face lined with fatigue. She had heard the whispers, too. She stepped inside, carrying a small ceramic cup of warm milk. Her voice was soft, almost breaking. "Officer Hayes, the little one should not have to carry such thoughts. I should have spoken sooner." Daniel looked up, his storm-gray eyes burning with both gratitude and anguish. "Rosa, you've done more than you think. You've kept her alive when I was blind. But I need to know everything." Rosa hesitated, her eyes filling with fear. She twisted the cup in her hands. I am afraid, sir. Afraid of being sent away. If I leave, who will stay beside her when you are gone?" Her words carried decades of quiet endurance. Rosa had once been a mother herself, raising 2 sons alone after her husband perished in a factory accident. That hardship had carved resilience into her. Yet losing one son to war had left her with deep sorrow she buried beneath service to others. Now, in Lily, she seemed to find a second chance at nurturing. Daniel touched her arm gently. "I won't let them drive you out, but I need the truth." Rosa nodded slowly, tears sliding down her cheeks, and whispered, "The child is often made to wait. Food is hidden, taken away. She is called names, punished for nothing. When parties are held, only scraps are left for her." Her voice trembled. "One night she waited until midnight for cold soup. She smiled, sir, as if it were a gift. That broke my heart." Daniel's fists clenched at his sides. His oath as an officer had always been to protect the vulnerable, yet he had failed under his own roof. He kissed Lily's forehead gently, his voice rough. "Never again." Just then, footsteps echoed from the stairs. Vanessa's voice, faint but sharp, cut through the silence. "Daniel, are you still up?" Daniel quickly tucked Lily under her blanket, whispering soothingly. Rex's ears twitched, a low growl building in his throat before Daniel hushed him with a hand. Rosa wiped her tears swiftly, straightening her back as Vanessa appeared in the doorway, her robe tied neatly, her pale eyes flicking across the room. "What's going on here?" she asked, her tone light but edged. Daniel met her gaze with a calmness that was almost dangerous. "Just saying goodnight to my daughter." Vanessa's lips tightened, but she forced a smile. "How sweet. Don't spoil her too much, darling. Children need discipline." With that, she drifted back down the hallway, her silhouette fading into the shadows. When she was gone, Daniel exhaled slowly, his jaw clenched. He looked at Rosa and whispered, "From tonight forward, she is never alone." Rex thumped his tail once against the floor, as though sealing the vow. Later, in his own room, Daniel lay awake again. Vanessa's quiet breathing beside him no longer fooled him. His mind burned with the whisper he had heard, with the sight of Rosa's tears, and with the memory of Claire's last plea. He knew now, beyond doubt, that the enemy in his house wore the mask of a wife. And he also knew this battle could not be fought with fists or rage. It would be fought with patience, with evidence, with truth that could not be denied. As the clock struck midnight, Rex padded softly into the room and lay beside Daniel's side of the bed. His amber eyes glowed faintly in the dark, watching, guarding. The loyal dog would not sleep until his master did. Outside, the wind rattled the windows again, as if whispering the same vow. The time of silence was ending. The following week, Willow Creek seemed to dress itself in calm. Golden leaves blanketed the sidewalks, children in scarves rushed home from school, and the town's small diner bustled with the chatter of families sharing pie and coffee. Yet inside the Hayes house, the mask of normalcy had begun to fracture. Daniel moved with a new precision, his storm-gray eyes sharper than ever, his every step purposeful. He no longer drifted through his home as a guest. He was now a watchman, every sense alert to the hidden cruelty lurking beneath polished surfaces. Vanessa continued her act with flawless dedication. She cooked elaborate meals when visitors were expected, smiled with practiced warmth at the neighbors, and laughed with Lily in staged moments whenever Daniel entered the room. But the cameras recorded the truth once he stepped away. Each night, when Lily was ordered to earn scraps or mocked for her speech, the small, blinking red light above the chandelier witnessed it all. On a Tuesday afternoon, Daniel invited Ethan back under the guise of needing help with home repairs. Together, they sat in the study, footage flickering across the monitor. Ethan's broad shoulders tensed as he leaned forward, his brown eyes hardening. They watched Vanessa stagger into the kitchen after another night of drinking, Lily sitting silently at the table, waiting for food. Vanessa shoved a plate toward her with only crumbs and laughed when Lily whispered a thank you. Ethan exhaled slowly, shaking his head. "Dan, this isn't neglect. This is targeted cruelty. And with Carl and that Madison woman joining in, this is abuse." Daniel's fists clenched, the veins in his forearm tight. "I knew it. I just needed to see it." His voice broke with guilt. "I swore to Claire I'd protect her, and I let this happen." Ethan put a steadying hand on his shoulder. "You're protecting her now, but we need more, enough to leave no shadow of doubt." That night, while Vanessa slept in their bed, Daniel sat alone in the living room, Rex curled at his feet. The German shepherd's eyes followed every movement, his scarred flank rising with each breath, his ears flicking at faint sounds beyond the walls. Daniel stroked his fur, whispering, "You've been her shield when I wasn't. You'll be the reason she feels safe again." Rex licked his hand, tail sweeping once against the hardwood floor. The true crack in Vanessa's mask came 3 days later. She accused Rosa of theft. It began with a sharp cry from the parlor. Vanessa stormed into the hallway, her silk blouse immaculate, her blonde hair twisted into an elegant bun. In her manicured hand, she held a jewelry box, empty. Her pale eyes flashed with accusation as she pointed at Rosa, who stood frozen near the dining table with a dish towel in hand. "Where is it? My mother's necklace gone. You're the only one who touches this room." Rosa's face drained of color. Her silver hair slipped loose from its pins, and her hands trembled around the towel. "Madam, I have worked for this family more than 20 years. Her voice cracked under the weight of fear. Lily peeked from behind the banister, clutching her bear. Her wide eyes filled with panic as she saw Rosa cornered. Rex growled low in his throat, stepping closer to Rosa's side, his body angled protectively. Carl appeared from the back door then, smirking. He carried the missing necklace in his palm, holding it just long enough for Daniel, watching from the shadows, to notice before slipping it under the cushion of Rosa's chair. Carl's hazel eyes glinted with malice. Daniel's heart pounded. He had seen enough. But before he could step forward, Ethan emerged from the kitchen doorway. The older man had returned that evening under the pretense of dropping off tools. His limp made his steps heavy, but his eyes were sharp as blades. He carried a small tablet, its screen glowing with paused footage. "Funny thing," Ethan drawled, his voice steady. "Because I just happened to review the cameras in this very room, and it looks like Carl here misplaced that necklace himself." Vanessa stiffened, her painted smile cracking for the first time. "Cameras? You—" Her voice faltered, her composure slipping like silk unraveling at the seams. Carl's smirk vanished, his face paling as Ethan tapped the screen, revealing the clear footage of him planting the necklace. Rosa's hand flew to her chest, relief mixing with tears. "Gracias, Señor Ethan," she whispered. Lily ran to her, hugging her legs tightly, the bear pressed between them. Rex barked once, sharp and triumphant, as though announcing victory. Vanessa, however, recovered quickly. She forced a laugh, brittle and sharp. "It must have been a misunderstanding. Surely we can't make accusations over toys." Her voice lacked the confidence it once carried. Daniel stepped forward at last, his voice low, cutting. "You tried to destroy a woman's life, a woman who's given her years to this family. Don't call this a misunderstanding." For the first time, Vanessa faltered. Her pale eyes darted between Daniel, Ethan, Rosa, and Rex, all aligned against her, and something twisted in her smile. She set the jewelry box down with trembling hands, murmuring, "Perhaps I had too much to drink." She retreated to the stairs, her back stiff, her mask slipping further with each step. That night, Daniel sat alone again, staring at the footage. He saw Rosa's fear, Lily's trembling, and Vanessa's cracked facade. The guilt tore at him, but beneath it was a new fire, resolve sharper than the badge he wore each day. He no longer doubted his course. The truth was out, and he would see it through until every mask shattered. The days after the jewelry incident carried a strange quiet over the Hayes household, like the pause before a storm breaks. Autumn in Willow Creek had deepened, the air sharper, the trees thinning until their branches clawed against a gray sky. Daniel felt the change in his bones each morning as he stood at the window of the police station, coffee cooling in his hand. He had returned to duty, but his mind was never far from the house, from Lily, from the hidden war still unfolding beneath his own roof. Rosa carried herself differently since Ethan had exposed the lie. The elderly woman, with her stooped shoulders and hands hardened by decades of scrubbing, now moved with a quiet dignity restored. She was tall for her age, her silver hair wound neatly into a bun, her dark eyes still sharp beneath her wrinkles. She rarely spoke unless spoken to, but she had earned Lily's complete trust. Each night Daniel would hear his daughter's laughter when Rosa told stories of her youth in Mexico, of her father's orange grove, and of fiestas filled with music. That laughter, fragile yet genuine, gave him a small thread of hope. Vanessa, however, had not surrendered. Her politeness at the dinner table now had an edge, her voice too sweet, her smiles too deliberate. Daniel caught her watching him often, her pale eyes narrowed, as if calculating how to regain the control she had once held with ease. And in those glances, he saw the danger. One Friday evening, as a drizzle misted the streets, Daniel returned home to find a new car parked outside, a gleaming black sedan with tinted windows. At first, he thought it belonged to one of Vanessa's friends, but when he entered, he found a stranger in his living room. The man was seated casually on the sofa, his long legs crossed, a glass of Vanessa's wine in his hand. He wore a tailored navy suit, though the loosened tie and the casual drape of his posture suggested arrogance rather than refinement. His hair was slicked back, dark with streaks of silver at the temples, and his sharp jaw was covered with a faint shadow of stubble. When he stood, he revealed himself to be tall and broad-shouldered, a presence that filled the room. "This is Victor Callahan," Vanessa said smoothly, appearing from the kitchen with a false brightness in her tone. "An old friend of mine. He's in real estate. He may help us with some investments." Victor extended his hand with a smirk. His grip was too strong, the kind that tested dominance. His gray-green eyes glittered with a predator's ease. "Officer Hayes," he said, "I've heard plenty about you." Daniel's instincts flared immediately. There was something off about the man, the way he scanned the room, noting exits, measuring Daniel, even glancing at Lily's small figure retreating behind the staircase banister. Rex stepped between them, hackles rising, a low growl rumbling from his chest. Victor chuckled, crouching slightly as though to meet the German shepherd's gaze. "That's a fine animal you've got there. Protective, loyal. Must be useful for someone in your line of work." His tone was mocking, but his eyes lingered too long on Rex, as if weighing him. Later, when Lily had been ushered upstairs, Daniel confronted Vanessa. "Who is he really?" His voice was steel. She tilted her head, her lips curling faintly. "Just a friend who knows opportunities when he sees them. Not everyone is stuck in the past like you, Daniel." But Daniel knew better. Victor was no mere real estate agent. He carried himself like a man used to bending rules until they broke. He promised himself he would dig deeper. That night, in the quiet of the study, Ethan arrived again. The lawyer carried with him more than paperwork this time. He brought a worn manila folder filled with records. Ethan explained that Victor Callahan's name had appeared before in police files. Shady property deals, allegations of intimidation, and ties to small-time organized crime. Nothing had stuck, but the smoke was thick enough to know there was fire. Daniel felt fury twist in his chest. Vanessa was aligning herself with men like this, wolves circling a house already weakened by deceit. He glanced at the monitor showing the cameras, the silent eye recording everything. For the first time, he realized the battle was expanding beyond cruelty inside the walls. Outside, forces were being drawn in. Meanwhile, Lily had begun attending a small support group at the town library, arranged quietly by Ethan's niece, Hannah Miller. Hannah was 26, a librarian with long auburn hair, she often tied in a loose braid. She had warm hazel eyes behind her glasses, and a gentle patience with children. Having grown up with a mother who battled addiction, Hannah had learned early how to create safe spaces. She welcomed Lily with soft encouragement, letting the girl sit quietly with crayons while other children read aloud. Daniel noticed the difference almost immediately. His daughter, once so withdrawn, now carried sketches of small houses and dogs home in her backpack. One evening, she even showed him a drawing of Rex standing proudly beside her, a cape fluttering like a superhero's. "He's my knight," she said softly, smiling shyly. That smile drove Daniel's resolve deeper. If Vanessa thought she could still break Lily, she was wrong. The turning point came on a cold Sunday night. Daniel returned home late after handling an accident report. As he stepped into the foyer, he heard voices in the parlor. He paused, listening. Vanessa's voice, sharp, impatient. Victor's voice, low, coaxing. "He's suspicious," Vanessa hissed. "He'll ruin everything." Victor laughed softly, the sound like oil on water. "Then you let me handle it. You want the money, the life you thought you married into? Trust me, Hayes won't know what hit him." Daniel's stomach tightened. He stepped back silently, his hand brushing Rex's head as the dog pressed against his leg. He would not confront them yet, but the truth was now undeniable. Vanessa had escalated, and Victor was her weapon. Upstairs, Lily stirred in her sleep, whispering fragments of her dream. Rosa sat in the chair by her bed, as she often did now, humming an old lullaby. Her presence was a shield as much as Rex's. In that quiet room, the war below seemed far away. But Daniel knew it was only the eye of the storm. The November air in Willow Creek carried a sharp bite, the kind that stung the lungs and left frost on car windows even before sunrise. At the Hayes residence, Daniel woke earlier than usual, dressing in his patrol uniform with deliberate care. His reflection in the mirror showed more lines than before, his storm-gray eyes shadowed but unwavering. Rex padded into the room, the black and silver German shepherd shaking his thick coat and stretching stiff legs. At nearly 6 years old, he carried scars across his flank from past encounters, yet his amber eyes burned with loyalty. The two left the house before dawn, slipping quietly into the station where Daniel could focus on what was coming. At the station, Daniel's colleague, Officer Marlene Cooper, intercepted him. Marlene was in her mid-30s, with chestnut hair cropped short under her cap, freckles dotting her pale skin, and a quick wit that made her popular among fellow officers. She had a reputation for persistence. Once she latched onto a case, she wouldn't let go until every stone was overturned. "Dan, you look like you haven't slept in weeks," she remarked, handing him a folder. "What's going on? And don't say nothing. You're too wound up for that." Daniel hesitated but finally lowered his voice. "It's personal, but it's starting to spill into my work. There's a man, Victor Callahan. I need to know everything you can find on him." Quietly. Marlene arched an eyebrow but nodded. "If he's dirty, I'll dig it up." She tucked the folder under her arm and strode off, her boots clicking against the tiled floor. Meanwhile, at home, Rosa was preparing breakfast when she noticed Victor's sedan parked across the street again. He wasn't inside the house this time, but his presence loomed like a shadow. She drew the curtains, her hands trembling slightly. Her life had been marked by hardship, losing her husband to a factory accident in her 30s, raising 2 sons alone until they moved far away. That grief had left her cautious, but also fiercely protective of Lily. She whispered a prayer under her breath, vowing not to let the girl suffer alone. Lily herself had begun to show small sparks of resilience. At the library, she had grown close to Hannah Miller, who encouraged her to read aloud during group sessions. Hannah's voice was gentle, patient, coaxing the words from Lily's lips. "Take your time," she would say, her hazel eyes warm behind her glasses. Lily's drawings grew brighter too, less shadow, more color. Yet each time she returned home, her shoulders stiffened again under Vanessa's cold gaze. That Friday night, Daniel came home to find the house unusually lively. Vanessa had organized another gathering, smaller but no less insidious. Madison Clark was there, her blonde curls styled in dramatic waves, crimson lipstick gleaming. She laughed too loudly, sipping wine and tossing snide comments masked as jokes. Carl Vega lounged in the corner, cigarette smoke curling around his thin frame, his narrow eyes darting to the cameras with suspicion. And Victor sat in the center of it all, commanding the room with quiet authority, his gray-green eyes scanning every movement like a predator, sizing up prey. Daniel walked in, his badge still visible on his belt. The chatter faltered for a moment before Vanessa filled the silence with her tinkling laugh. "Darling, you're home. We were just discussing future plans. Victor has such brilliant ideas." Victor raised his glass in mock salute. "Officer Hayes, always good to see a man who keeps his community safe." His tone dripped with false respect. Daniel forced a tight smile but said nothing. He guided Lily upstairs, Rex following like a sentinel. Later that night, as he sat by his daughter's bedside, Lily whispered, "Daddy, why does that man always come here? He scares Rex." Her small hand clutched his sleeve. Daniel smoothed her tangled hair and kissed her forehead. "Because he doesn't belong here, sweetheart, and soon he won't be here at all." The following morning, Marlene arrived at Daniel's office with a thick file. "You were right to be suspicious," she said grimly. "Callahan's tied to shell companies, extortion rackets, and at least 2 missing person cases in the city. He's clever, though. Never leaves fingerprints. But he's dangerous, Dan. If your wife's tangled up with him, you're standing on a powder keg." Daniel absorbed the words with clenched fists. His suspicion was no longer paranoia. It was fact. He thanked Marlene, who gave him a warning glance. "Don't try to take him down alone. Wolves hunt in packs." Back at the Hayes house, Rosa noticed something unsettling. Victor had slipped an envelope into Vanessa's hands before leaving that afternoon. She caught only a glimpse, but the thick stack of cash was unmistakable. Vanessa tucked it quickly into her purse, her pale face calm, but her eyes flashing with greed. Rosa's stomach twisted. She knew then that Vanessa wasn't just a cruel stepmother. She was compromised, tied to something much larger and far darker. That evening, Ethan joined Daniel in the study. Together, they reviewed the camera footage again, but this time, Victor appeared. He was careful, never overtly threatening, yet his conversations hinted at plans. "This town's small," he murmured to Vanessa on one recording. "Easy to own if you play it right. You'll have everything you wanted, respect, wealth, and Hayes. He'll never see it coming." Ethan rubbed his jaw, his weathered face lined with concern. "He's not just here for Vanessa. He's after influence. He'll use her until she's no more useful, then discard her. You need to be ready for when that happens." Daniel leaned back, exhaustion in his eyes, but determination in his voice. "Then we expose him, just like we exposed her lies. But this time, we do it before Lily pays the price." Upstairs, Lily dreamed fitfully, murmuring in her sleep. Rex lay at the foot of her bed, his ears twitching at every creak in the house, his body tense as though he too sensed the storm drawing nearer. In the dim glow of the nightlight, Daniel watched them both and made a vow stronger than any badge could hold. No matter what Victor and Vanessa planned, he would not allow darkness to consume his daughter again. The first heavy snow of the season arrived in Willow Creek overnight, burying the streets in a blanket of white that softened the edges of houses and muffled the usual hum of traffic. Daniel shoveled the driveway before dawn, his breath steaming in the frozen air, his muscles aching from lack of rest. Rex bounded through the drifts beside him, his thick fur speckled with flakes, his tail wagging despite the cold. For a moment, it almost felt like normal life. But the illusion shattered as soon as Daniel glanced toward the street corner, where Victor's black sedan sat idling, exhaust curling like smoke from a hidden fire. Inside, Vanessa floated around the kitchen like a hostess preparing for royalty. Her blonde hair was pinned elegantly, her silk blouse pristine, her smile too wide. She hummed under her breath while setting out china cups for tea. Rosa, moving quietly in the background, caught Daniel's gaze and shook her head ever so slightly. She had seen Vanessa like this before, on edge, rehearsing a part. Something was coming. That afternoon, Victor himself walked through the door, as though the house already belonged to him. He carried the cold inside with him, his long navy coat dusted with snow, his gray-green eyes glinting with satisfaction. "Hayes," he said, voice smooth. "We need to talk." Daniel tensed but nodded toward the study. Then, "Let's talk where my daughter doesn't have to hear it." In the study, Victor spread papers across the desk. Property deeds, loan contracts, proposals for community development. His voice was calm, but carried an undercurrent of threat. "This town's ripe for investment. Vanessa understands that. She and I have been discussing ways to expand influence. With your badge, your reputation, you could smooth the path. We'd all benefit." Daniel's jaw tightened. "So this is what you've been circling for? Money, power, and you think I'll sell my integrity to your schemes?" Victor leaned back, his broad frame filling the chair, his smirk growing. "Not sell, partner, and if you don't, well, accidents happen. Men in uniform lose their footing all the time. Families get hurt when they're left unprotected." His eyes flicked upward, toward the ceiling, where Lily's room was. Before Daniel could answer, Rex growled, stepping closer to Victor with hackles raised, teeth bared. The sound was low and primal, vibrating in the small room. Victor didn't flinch. Instead, he reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a strip of beef jerky, tossing it toward Rex. The German shepherd ignored it, eyes fixed like amber fire on the man. Victor chuckled. Smart animal, loyal, he'll be trouble. The confrontation ended without blows, but Daniel knew the war had crossed a line. Victor had revealed his hand and his threat. That evening, Ethan returned, his heavy leather case in hand. The lawyer's face was lined with worry. Dan, you're dealing with a man who thrives on intimidation. If you confront him directly, he'll escalate. We need strategy. He opened the case, revealing new devices, voice recorders, more discreet cameras. We document every threat, every word. We make his arrogance our weapon. Meanwhile, Hannah Miller noticed Lily's unease at the library session. The young librarian wore a cozy gray sweater that day, her auburn braid falling over her shoulder as she leaned close to Lily. "You seem distracted," she said gently. Lily shrugged, hugging her sketchbook. "There's a man who scares Rex, and if Rex is scared, then he must be bad." Hannah's hazel eyes softened. "Then remember this. Bad people fear the truth. You're stronger than you think." She encouraged Lily to draw what made her feel safe. Lily drew a picture of herself, Daniel, Rosa, Rex, and Hannah standing together beneath a bright sun. The drawing was crooked and childlike, but full of color. Hannah taped it to the library's wall, declaring it the sun that shines on Willow Creek. For Lily, that small gesture was a shield against the fear waiting at home. Later that week, Madison Clark hosted a party at her apartment downtown, and Vanessa insisted on attending. Rosa stayed behind with Lily, while Daniel used the absence as an opportunity. He followed Victor's sedan as it pulled away from Madison's building. The chase led him to a warehouse at the edge of town. Hidden in the shadows, Daniel watched as Victor met with two men. The first was a stocky man in his 40s named Reggie Mason, wearing a leather jacket and carrying himself with the blunt confidence of someone who had broken more than a few laws. His buzz-cut hair revealed a jagged scar across his temple, and his rough laugh carried in the cold air. The second was thinner, gaunt almost, with pale skin and sunken eyes. Earl Slim Parker, a known loan shark who preyed on struggling families. Daniel recognized both names from old reports. His stomach tightened as he realized Victor wasn't building influence alone. He was weaving a network. He recorded everything on his phone, Victor handing envelopes of cash, Reggie promising to handle obstacles, Slim muttering about squeezing local shop owners. When Victor stepped back into his car, Daniel melted into the shadows, his breath clouding in the icy air. He had evidence now, but it was only the beginning. At home that night, Rosa tucked Lily into bed, humming softly while Rex settled at the foot of the mattress. Daniel sat in the hallway, listening to the music of safety, his mind heavy with the knowledge of what he'd seen. He thought of Victor's smirk, of Vanessa's greed, of the way Madison laughed as though cruelty was entertainment, and he knew the storm was almost upon them. Snow fell harder that week, draping Willow Creek in white silence, but inside Daniel Hayes' home, tension throbbed like a live wire. The cameras Ethan had placed hummed quietly, recording every whisper, every sneer, every shadow that dared to linger. Daniel had evidence, but Victor Callahan and his allies were tightening their grip. The final confrontation was no longer a question of if, but when. On a Thursday evening, Vanessa swept into the parlor in a crimson dress, her pale face gleaming with anticipation. She poured wine for Victor, who lounged on the sofa with his coat draped over the armrest. Reggie Mason leaned against the mantel, his thick arms crossed, his scar catching the firelight. Earl Slim Parker sat twitching in a chair, his long fingers drumming nervously on the table. Madison Clark hovered by the window, her shrill laughter breaking the tension. They looked less like guests and more like a council of predators. Daniel entered, his uniform still on, his badge catching the light. His storm gray eyes were calm, but his voice was steel. "Enjoying yourselves? Because it ends tonight." Victor smirked, rising slowly, his tall frame towering. Big words for a man with no allies. But then Ethan stepped from the hallway, his heavy case in hand. Marlene Cooper followed, her chestnut hair tucked beneath her cap, her service pistol holstered, but visible. Behind them came Sheriff Donnelly, the county's chief lawman, a stout man in his 60s with a thick mustache and steady hands. Donnelly was known across the county for his fairness and incorruptibility. His broad shoulders and deep voice gave weight to every word. "This is no longer your stage, Callahan." For the first time, Victor's smirk faltered. Daniel opened Ethan's case, pulling out a laptop connected to the house system. He played the recordings, Victor's threats, Reggie's promises of violence, Slim's muttered plans, Vanessa's whispered collusion. The room filled with their own voices, undeniable. Rosa appeared in the doorway, her silver hair glowing under the chandelier, Lily clinging to her hand, with Rex pressed close at her side. The girl's wide eyes darted nervously, but she stood firm, her bear clasped tight. Vanessa snapped, her voice sharp. "This means nothing. It's doctored." Marlene stepped forward, dropping a second folder onto the table. "Cross-verified with county surveillance. Bank records, phone logs. It's over." Victor's mask cracked. His gray-green eyes narrowed, his jaw tightening as he lunged for the door. Rex launched like a bolt of lightning, his powerful body slamming Victor back. The German shepherd's teeth snapped just inches from Victor's throat, his growl echoing through the parlor. Daniel's voice rang out, firm. "Stand down, Rex!" The dog obeyed, muscles taut, eyes still locked on the man who had threatened his family. Reggie roared, charging forward, but Sheriff Donnelly drew his weapon with a speed that belied his age. "Don't," he said simply. Reggie froze. Slim tried to slip toward the kitchen, but Marlene blocked him, her freckled face grim, her hand on her holster. Madison shrieked, dropping her glass of wine, crimson liquid spreading like blood across the rug. In the chaos, Vanessa stumbled, her dress twisting around her legs. For a moment, her pale mask dropped, revealing fear. Not for Lily, not for her family, but for herself. She whispered hoarsely, "Victor, you promised..." Victor snarled back, "I promised you nothing." Donnelly's deputies stormed in, securing the criminals one by one. Reggie's hands were forced behind his back, Slim's twitching stilled by cold steel cuffs, Madison sobbing as she was led away. Victor fought hardest, but it was Rex's relentless growl and Daniel's unyielding gaze that finally broke his defiance. Shackled, he spat venom. "You think you've won, Hayes, but this town will eat you alive." Daniel stepped closer, his voice low but resolute. "No, this town protects its own. You underestimated that." As the predators were taken away, silence returned, broken only by the crackle of the fire. Vanessa remained, pale and trembling. Donnelly turned to Daniel. "What of her?" Daniel's storm-gray eyes softened only when they fell on Lily, clutching Rosa's skirt. He shook his head. "That's for the courts, but she's not family anymore." The days that followed were filled with hearings and testimonies. Victor's empire collapsed swiftly, his allies scattered. Vanessa faced charges for complicity, her polished mask stripped away for all to see. For Daniel, the battles weren't just fought in courtrooms, but in the quiet corners of his home, where Lily still whispered in her sleep and clutched her bear tightly. It was Hannah Miller who suggested a new kind of healing. She invited Lily to paint a mural at the library, something bright, something hers. Together, with Daniel standing nearby, Lily painted a field of sunflowers under a wide blue sky. At the center was a girl, holding hands with her father, Rosa standing beside them, and Rex painted larger than life, with a golden halo of sunlight around his fur. Hannah smiled softly, saying, "Now everyone in town will see what light looks like." The mural became a symbol. Neighbors stopped to admire it. Children traced the painted sunflowers with their fingers, and Lily beamed with a confidence that had once seemed impossible. Daniel felt pride swell each time he saw her smile, each time Rex lay content at her feet, each time Rosa hummed softly in the kitchen. The final snowfall of the season came in March. Daniel built a small swing set in the yard, his calloused hands rough against the wooden beams. Lily helped by handing him nails and tools, her laughter like bells in the crisp air. Rosa sat nearby, knitting, while Rex darted through the snow, his breath puffing in clouds. Hannah stopped by with books and cocoa, her auburn braid glinting in the afternoon light. For the first time in years, the house was filled not with silence or fear, but with life. That evening, as the sunset painted the horizon in gold and violet, Daniel sat on the porch steps, Lily nestled against his side. She whispered, "Daddy, are the bad people gone forever?" He pressed a kiss to her hair, his voice steady. "They're gone, sweetheart, and they'll never come back." Rex stretched out at their feet. Rosa hummed from the kitchen, and the mural at the library glowed under the town's lights. For Daniel Hayes, the storm had passed, and in its wake, love had become the shield that would never fail again. In the end, this story reminds us that even in the darkest winters, God can send light through the simplest of miracles: a father's love, a child's smile, and the loyalty of a faithful German shepherd. Life will always bring trials, but with faith and courage, we can find healing and hope again. Let us remember that the Lord watches over the most vulnerable and gives us strength to protect them. If this story touched your heart, please share it with someone who needs encouragement. Leave a comment below about your thoughts and subscribe so you never miss another story of faith and love. May God bless you and your family with peace and protection. And if you believe in the miracle of love that only He can provide, type Amen in the comments.